Well, welcome. Welcome to the New Democrat Network, to NDN, and to our Latin American Policy Initiative. I'm Nelson Cunningham. I'm the chair of the Policy Initiative. I am here in the stead of Simon Rosenberg, NDN's founder, who is off with his family this week. It's a good place to be. And I'm here for a really terrific opportunity, which is to have an in-depth discussion with Colombia's ambassador to the United States, Gabriel Silva. Ambassador, these forums we hold about once a month. We have members of Congress, we have members from the diplomatic community, we have members from the administration to talk about the issues that are alive today in U.S.-Latin American relations. And I would say the advantage that NDN brings is that NDN combines a keen sense of American politics with Latin American foreign policy. And we try to make the two alive to each other. Sometimes our foreign policy is disconnected from our politics here in the United States, and sometimes vice versa. We try to bring the two together, and this is an excellent forum to do that. We're joined here today by at least two of our LAPI board members, Linda Edelman and Ann Alonso. Thank you for coming. We're also joined by the ambassador from Guatemala. Thank you, ambassador, for coming and showing support to your colleague from Colombia. And we look forward to having you at a LAPI event, and I hope that we could find a time to do that in the future. A couple of words of introduction, and then I'll turn the floor over to Ambassador Silva for his remarks, and then I hope to have a good, robust Q&A afterward. Ambassador Silva, although he is new to Washington in this incarnation, is hardly new to Washington. He has a graduate degree from Johns Hopkins SAIS. He returned to Colombia and served as a senior advisor to, was it 2 or 3 presidents back in the 1980s and 1990s? 2. In 1994, he came to Washington in his first incarnation as Colombia's ambassador to the United States. He then spent time in the private sector, including a very successful stint as head of Colombia's very powerful Coffee Growers Association. And anyone who has ever who knows the name Juan Valdez knows the power of the Coffee Growers Association here in the United States and the ability to project a positive image for Colombia. Ambassador Silva comes to this post, as you can see, with a broad range of backgrounds, having represented his country numerous times with a keen sense of Washington. Ambassador, before I turn the floor over to you, let me say that Colombia has a very close place in my heart, because when I was 5 weeks old, my parents moved to Colombia, and we lived in Cali, Colombia, when I was very young. My brother was born in Cali. I'm sure if I had lived longer, I would have married a girl from Cali, which is what everybody in Colombia tells you should do. But Colombia and U.S. Colombian relations are very close to my heart, and I'm particularly delighted to have you here. Let's welcome Ambassador Silva for his remarks.
I want to thank Chairman Cunningham for his very kind words, and most of all for his friendship and his love for Colombia. Certainly we miss you didn't marry a Colombian woman, but your fondness of our country compensates. Also I want to thank my colleague, the Ambassador of Guatemala. Muchas gracias por estar conmigo hoy, te agradezco inmensamente. And your board members, as well as all the guests who decided to join us today. And I want to tell you that this is a very unique opportunity, at a very unique moment in Colombia and in the world. So I will use your blessing to be a little bit academic about what we're going to talk today. And also I'll try to be provocative, setting a series of statements. I'm sure they're going to be controversial, and I hope that's the idea. I know that Andean loves debate and intellectual openness, so I will take advantage of that preference that you have here in this forum. I would like to start saying that the U.S. has to review the current status of the world and reassess its role as a major power in a multi-power world. And that's not easy when you have been hegemonic for so many decades. But it's the time to do it. It's the right time to do it. The quick fixes, the easy solutions, pouring money into problems won't work anymore. You need to review deeply how should the U.S. conduct its foreign policy in a very dangerous and unpredictable world. I don't want to go through the list of the elements that prove how unpredictable and how difficult and uncertain this world has become. They're evident every day in the headlines. They are every day present, not only on the geopolitical and security threats or issues, but also, even as we have just learned with Japan, even on the major blows that nature can give us. And I want to express my condolences to the Japanese people, whom I love personally in a very deep way, because I have been traveling to Japan since I was 5. So I have a very personal and deep relationship with this country and with these people. I have many friends there. I had the privilege of being appointed by the emperor as one of the foreigners who are sons of the rising sun. And just to illustrate how deep my connection to this country is. And a country that I love deeply, and I wanted to share that feeling with all of you, particularly in this moment. So, going back to the initial statement, I believe that this is a good time to sit down as a nation and sit down as a hemispheric community and review where we are and where we're headed. We have a beautiful opportunity next year. We have the Summit of the Americas in Cartagena. If you ask me on a personal basis, what should be the topic of that summit, I will say we need to discuss how we guarantee stability in the areas that are already stable. Always foreign policy is conducted, or many times is conducted, from crisis to crisis. And in this current world and with these new technologies and all what is going on, no one can predict where is the next crisis. And I firmly believe that you have to invest in those areas and those regions that are your core foundations, in those areas and those regions in which you can be sure that the level of uncertainty is less threatening. Because in a multipolar world, and a world that is operated as fast as this one, you need to have at least a minimum of certainty. And I want to state that Colombia is probably one of the most important certainties in the hemisphere for the U.S. And Colombia also is a tremendous success of bilateral cooperation, bipartisan foreign policy, and shared values. Colombia is today a new Colombia after a decade of tremendous efforts. And this is not only a rhetoric or a form of subjective love for my country. It's evident in the numbers. Colombia has changed dramatically in the last decade, and it's continued changing and moving forward. I'll give you some numbers and some figures and facts that probably can illustrate this in a better way. In 2004, the GDP per capita in Colombia was less than $2,500. Now it's close to $6,000 per person, per capita. Colombia's foreign trade has tripled in 5 years, and just last year, it grew 24%. And I could go on through the figures of how the violence has been reducing. For example, in 2002, we had close to 30,000 homicides. In 2010, we had 14,000. It's still very high. But actually, if you see it as a percentage of the population, it's lower than DC. So this is a tremendous effort. This is a tremendous effort with great results. Colombia has been, for many reasons, a country that has loved the U.S. despite the early 20th century's issues that affected our relationship. And the other day I was saying that we haven't had those issues in the early 20th century. We probably won't be discussing about the Colombian-Panama FTA, but about the Colombia FTA. We only won, not two. But things developed the way they did, and thank God we emerged as very close friends. Because Colombia didn't have any major period of dictatorship. And there was no polarization around the U.S. Dictatorships in the region created a polarization in public opinion, in which you had a group of pro-democracy or left-wing social forces basically arguing that the source of their problems and the lack of democracy was associated somehow to the U.S. And that created a cultural bias against the U.S., rightly or wrong. The fact is that Colombia escaped that. And Colombia has a public opinion that's very close and very friendly to the U.S. And that's very unique in the region. And it's not something that you can just say is an emotional issue or a subjective issue. It's very important for the U.S. to be loved around the world, to be liked, to be understood, to be appreciated. It's not a minor thing. Actually, in the current world, it's better to be loved than be feared. And I think that the U.S. should move in that direction. Should move in the direction of being much more loved and less feared. And Colombia is a perfect example and a perfect opportunity for that purpose. Our bilateral agenda now is marked by two specific issues. One, the expiration of the Trade Preferences Act that was an expression of solidarity with the Andean region, an expression of the commitment of the U.S. to support Colombia and other countries in their fight against drug trafficking, and a gesture to help Colombia build a legal, vibrant economy. Those preferences expired around Valentine's Day, and that expiration is a major blow for Colombian exporters and for American business, because in the last 17 years, and I actually had the privilege of being ambassador when those preferences were implemented. For the last 17 plus years, those preferences have become a cornerstone of economic development and the export activity in Colombia, but also in the U.S. I was asking the Florist Association of America the other day, how many jobs do you think depend on Colombian flowers? And in a gesture of generosity, they told me almost all of them. 80% of flowers in the US are imported from Colombia. And there is a florist in every corner. There's a florist in every neighborhood. And most important, there's a florist in every congressional district. So we are talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs. I had also the privilege of discussing with the CEO of a textile company from North Carolina, Mr. Nations, from Parkdale Textiles. Parkdale is probably one of the few textile companies remaining in the US. A very vibrant one, a very efficient one. They generate 3,000 jobs in North Carolina. They buy almost 95% of all the cotton produced in America. And he told me that if they lose, because of the expiration of the trade preferences, if they lose the Colombian market, as they probably will, this probably put the company for the first time on the brink of bankruptcy. So this is a two-way street, even though they are unilateral preferences for Colombia. The other issue that we all have in mind is the free trade agreement between the US and Colombia. I was very encouraged by the fact that this morning we had the two opposing poles of American journalism, the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, both of them editorializing about the relevance for America and for US foreign policy and for the region, the relevance of having quick, fast approval of the FTA between Colombia and the US. And probably the only topic in which you can see today in Washington bilateral consensus is about this particular issue. I want to thank all of our friends, both in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, that have expressed many times jointly their commitment and their interest to have the Colombian Free Trade Agreement to be introduced simultaneously with other free trade agreements. So, in a city that is so involved in domestic politics, to have an issue that is relevant for American foreign policy and for business interests and for all of us, to have such an issue such an issue with the support of both parties and with the expression of urgency from all sides, business and both parties, certainly is very welcomed. Finally, because I agree with you, Nelson, that the critical thing here is very vibrant and dynamic Q&A session. So I will finalize highlighting the new role of Colombia as a major provider of energy to the US. In the current circumstances, that's not a minor issue. Colombia had declining oil reserves in the early 2000s, and we were producing around 350,000 barrels per day and declining. A very aggressive effort from the Colombian government and from the international business community and the oil companies has changed that. Currently, we produce close to 800,000 barrels per day and growing. We expect to reach 1 million barrels soon. And Colombia is today one of the largest providers of oil for the US in the hemisphere. Also, Colombia is the first supplier of coal to the US. Believe it or not, 67% of the market of thermal coal is provided by the US, in the US is provided by Colombia. And I wanted to highlight these aspects because we cannot, in this current world, forget about the strategic and geopolitical interests of the hemisphere and the U.S. There are many reasons to move ahead in strengthening U.S. Colombian bilateral relations. Some of them are historic, have been close friends forever. Some of them are economic, and certainly there is a strong case. Colombia is one of the largest markets for American farmers and American producers. And you could also argue that security and strategic reasons are very important. But I will say that the most important is that we have shared values. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador, thank you for those opening thoughts. Let me go ahead and get the discussion going by focusing on the first of the two significant bilateral issues, the free trade agreement. Colombia has been waiting a long time for its free trade agreement. Terms were concluded, I think it was 5 years ago with the Bush administration. And the agreement has not yet been formally presented by this president to our Congress. Meanwhile, you've seen the Korea agreement move forward with some dramatic action at the end of last year. The administration has said that their position is that they wish to do Korea right now, and then finish the negotiations, the renegotiations of Colombia and Panama before the end of this year, and then bring them up for a vote at the end of this year or perhaps the beginning of next year. There are those of us who watch this closely and who think that perhaps some of the concerted pressure on the administration is beginning to pay off, and that the timetables for Colombia and Panama may be getting shorter, and we may be able to get those done and moving more quickly. Now, President Santos' Chief of Staff, Juan Carlos Pinzón, was here last week for meetings with the U.S. government. I understand that among the topics discussed were the free trade agreement. This follows on the heels of a USTR trip down to Bogota some weeks ago. So my question for you is, where do things stand right now, and what is your sense of the timing of the renegotiation, the final negotiations between the U.S. and Colombia? How quickly do you think that something might get moving here in the United States? And do you think that we'll see a coordinated policy with the Korea Free Trade Agreement?
Well, the first thing I wanted to share with you is that there is a policy directive from the President. It's very clear. The text of the agreement is finalized, has been ratified by our Congress, is not going to be reopened, and I feel that, I understand that the administration is comfortable with that. So the treaty itself is somehow closed, is off bounds for any real discussion. Certainly, we can talk about other issues and other aspects. I want to go back to the NAFTA agreement that you know very well. You suffered somehow in the past in your previous incarnations. And I think that NAFTA is a good example of this type of discussion. Every administration has its own set of concerns. They are legitimate, and no matter how close President Santos and President Uribe are, they are different, and of course even more if they were talking about two different parties. So there is always a valid discussion in terms of how to proceed. I think that we have made progress. We have seen a sense of urgency, a shared sense of urgency. And as Ambassador Kirk said in his hearing at the Ways and Means, and more recently in his hearing at the Finance Committee, the administration, as we read it, wants to achieve immediate action. And both meetings, the one that we had with the delegation in Bogota and the recent one that we had with Mr. Pinzon and others who came to Washington under the invitation of U.S. and the White House. They suggest that we share the sense of urgency.
Well, for those of us who have been encouraging the administration to move forward quickly with all three, that's encouraging, Ambassador. Let me ask another question, and then I do hope to throw it open to those here in the room and also to those of us watching this on the web. We always get a substantial web audience for this of people who can't make it in person, and we'll invite those out there watching on the web to also send in questions if you have any. But while people in the audience are thinking about the questions that they might pose to you, Ambassador, let me switch to a topic that you didn't address, which is your neighbor to the east, Venezuela. President Uribe and President Chavez had a famously difficult relationship. President Santos, as you said, is very close to President Uribe, but is a different person. And he seems to be expressing that difference in the relationship that he is seeking to have with President Chavez and with Venezuela. I wonder if you could walk us through what the President's views are about Venezuela, how you all see Chavez and his influence in the Americas, and how you think Colombia can be a constructive player in helping to unify what is now a fairly large divide between the ALBA countries and the rest of the countries in the hemisphere.
Well, it's not appropriate for me to interpret the president publicly and to talk for him or speak for him. He has been quite vocal about his views on this matter. And I think that clearly we are going through a different phase in our regional relations. And I don't only mean Venezuela, but all the region. For example, we had Friday the election of a former foreign minister of Colombia as the secretary of UNASUR. That was unthinkable before. And I think that Colombia exerts an influence that is constructive, reduces ideological disputes in the region, helps find paths of convergence. I think that Colombia's role has been to heal previous wounds, and not only between the two countries, but also regionally, and to be a factor, an element, a force for better understanding. And certainly that's Spain for all the region in particular. The dialogue is much more fluid. The dialogue is much more objective. And that's being very constructive. In an era in which you have so many challenges and uncertainties, to build a strong dialogue, even with our differences, because we have our differences, we are able to move ahead in having this constructive dialogue and exerting an influence to promote and enhance that constructive dialogue. Certainly, that's where Colombia is right now.
Good. Let me turn it to the floor. Yes, right here in the front row. Why don't you wait for the microphone and then let us know your name and what your affiliation is.
Hi, Mr. Ambassador. I'm Matt Schul from Inside U.S. Trade. I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Ambassador, I know that the meeting that was mentioned with the Chief of Staff, Mr. Pinzon, took place, and that one of the goals of that meeting, according to the Colombian government, was to listen to ideas that the U.S. has about how to advance the free trade agreement. And I was wondering if you could share with us what are some of the ideas that the administration presented to you? Did they talk about benchmarks that Colombia would have to meet for the agreement to have congressional consideration? How did the Colombian government delegation respond, and what do you expect will be the purpose of the follow-up meeting that's going to be held in 2 weeks?
Well, I think that you're asking me way beyond what I can tell you.
That's his job.
I know. I know. Now we know each other by now.
Yeah.
No, the only thing I can tell you is that this was not a list review, as many times have been portrayed. It was a dialogue to hear the views that the administration has, and in a way it was the second round of a dialogue that took place in Bogota. And I don't know we're going to have a meeting in 2 weeks.
They said you were. Not sure.
We don't know if we're going to have a meeting in 2 weeks. So that depends on many issues. In particular, because this is just a dialogue that is beginning. So we have to see where it goes. Certainly it has been constructive. We have been talking about real issues, but beyond that, there's not more to say.
Yes, I'm Roger Cochetti. I work with companies in the technology sector, and I wanted to ask you, Mr. Ambassador, about another neighbor, this one to the north. Mexico, as I think we all know, has been going through a difficult period over the last couple of years with its own domestic drug organizations. And having successfully dealt with similar or comparable issues yourself, I was wondering if you had any advice for the United States from the experience that you've lived through in Colombia on what the United States can do to help Mexico and the Mexican leadership, and what the United States should not do in trying to be helpful to Mexico as hopefully we were to Colombia. Thank you.
Well, I certainly am not in a position to provide advice to the U.S. government in those matters. What I can tell you, what I can talk about is the Colombian experience. And if you ask me what is the key for the success in Colombia, I will say, first, consistency. Second, respect. And third, and most important, to mobilize regional support. And I think that Colombia is playing a role and is involved in an effort to offer its experience to our friends in a very open and generous way. And many of our friends in the region are taking advantage of our experience that was as difficult and as hard and threatening as the one we are seeing in other parts of the hemisphere. So we learned the lesson the hard way, and we want to share those experiences with other countries if they think it's useful, and share them, trying to create an effort, a regional effort that allows all of us to reduce the damage, to create synergies, and to achieve common goals. And that's our policy, and certainly that's a policy that works in the most open way, the most generous way, allowing all of your friends to dialogue and share experiences, and most important, to cooperate if they think it's useful.
Ambassador, in his prior existence, your president, President Santos, has been a frequent visitor to the United States. He's traveled here often. He's well known here in Washington. He's very comfortable here. He hasn't yet come since assuming the post of president. Do you have a visit planned or in mind for President Santos to Washington?
No, we don't really have a schedule for something like that. There is no actual meaning or content to the fact that he has not visited Washington. His priority was to get reacquainted with the region, and he has devoted a lot of energy to that. He's planning to also visit China in a state visit in the coming weeks, and he has been involved in a lot of regional efforts to get reacquainted and to introduce himself and to have a personal dialogue with our neighbors. There's no visit on the horizon. He's going to attend April 6th. He's going to attend the opening of the Colombian chairmanship of the UN Security Council in New York. He wants to come to New York to highlight how sensitive is the Haiti issue and how deep to his heart is the support for Haiti. And he wants to highlight that issue in the context of the UN Security Council. He wants to bring the issue and put all the political relevance to that issue, because unfortunately that issue is like fading away and the tragedy is still there. So he wants to emphasize the need for the UN system to refocus on Haiti. And of course, every day we have new catastrophes. And now probably everyone is thinking about Japan, but we cannot forget about the poorest country in the region, in the hemisphere, that is Haiti.
Other questions? First, Mr. Donahue.
Thank you. In the beginning,
Identify yourself for the
I'm
rest
Stephen
of the
Donahue
room.
from McClarty Associates, and I have also a long relationship with Colombia.
He did marry a Colombian woman,
I did
by the
marry
way.
a Colombian woman. In your initial comments, you talked about the time perhaps being appropriate for the U.S. to reevaluate its strategic relationships, much as President Santos did, I think, when he took office some months ago. One of the results of that appears to have been a decision to make Venezuela Colombia's new best friend, to quote President Santos. Is that a recommendation you would have for President Obama?
No, I will never dare to provide a recommendation to President Obama or his administration. That would be disrespectful. I will rephrase or reinterpret what you said, basically signaling that it's clear that the Colombian foreign policy, the current Colombian foreign policy, assigns significant priority to the region and to our neighbors, all of them, because we have been talking about our friend to the east, or neighbor to the east, but we haven't talked about our friends in Central America and our friends to the south and our friends to all around Colombia. And clearly the region, Central America, South America, the hemisphere is a critical and a key element of Colombian new foreign policy.
Yes, sir.
Santiago Tábara from Notimex. How long is Colombia willing to wait for the free trade agreement? I think you mentioned that Colombia was like threatening the Obama administration to withdraw from the agreement. And how do you feel about the human rights and labor rights issues that the Obama administration has expressed concern? Yes, if Colombia is willing to, how long is Colombia willing to wait for the, for the free trade agreement? And if he is satisfied with the human rights and labor rights issues that the Obama administration has expressed concern?
Well, when I was ambassador the first time 17 years ago, I visited the USTR and brought with me a little booklet, and the title of that booklet was U.S. and Colombia, a free trade partnership for the Americas. That was 17 years ago. I'm still waiting. So I have a lot of patience, a lot of patience. And we have not heard issues about human rights or labor issues in terms of generalities. We have discussed shared values about both issues. And I want to make this clear. We share the goals with the U.S. administration of strengthening the protection of labor rights, union rights, and certainly the protection of human rights. We have made significant progress, still much more to achieve, but that's a commitment of the Colombian people. And the Colombian government clearly is committed to that purpose.
Good. Yes, sir.
Douglas Farah. Mr. Ambassador, I was wondering if you could tell us what you think the relationship is between Venezuela and the FARC at this point, and what you see as the military conditions of the FARC as you go forward into this next year. What are you expecting from them, and how damaged have they been by your tenure as defense minister in the current administration?
Well, having been myself former Minister of Defense, I know I cannot speak about those issues.
Okay. Yes.
Michelle Manat, political consultant, former advisor to Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your very cogent and clear and understated message today. I wanted to flash the process forward a little bit and find out what's happening on Capitol Hill as far as what you're hearing, what kind of indications you're getting from people up there. Chairman Baucus was recently, Colombia took a group of people, business leaders, at least from his state, to Colombia and had a thorough visit, according to the press. There are something like 70, 75 new House members, all Republican, who have signed a letter stating that they are in favor of generally new approval of any new trade agreements that would come forward. So could you tell us a little bit about the climate as you and your able staff are assessing it on Capitol Hill?
Well, I would like to say that Colombia has many friends in Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, and many friends that have followed Colombia for many years, many friends that believe that we have a new Colombia, that it's time to reassess where Colombia is and look forward. Colombia cannot be kept hostage of its past. This is time to look into the future. I have heard this from many members in Congress and in the Senate. And as I said in my remarks, we feel there is a convergence from both parties and from many friends, convergence around the need to support Colombia, the need to keep building this special relationship that we have. And certainly both the Trade Preference Act and the Free Trade Agreement, as well as the Plan Colombia, are critical for this purpose. So we see a very unique situation in which Colombia and Panama, as a trade issue, have certainly created a dynamic that is way above the usual partisanship that you will expect currently in Congress.
Yes, back there, please.
Thank you. Mary Berger with Washington Trade Daily. Mr. Ambassador, could you talk a little bit more about the impact on Colombia's economy of not having the trade preferences? And are you getting any assurances from the administration that the program will be renewed soon? Thank you.
Well, the impact is severe because the average tariff that we are now paying for our imports to the U.S. is close to 10%, 12%. And it's creating a very difficult situation for our exporters that are operating on a currency appreciation environment and also operating on very thin margins. So to have from one day to the other an increase of this nature in your cost base is very damaging. It's damaging also American business that depend on these imports and have created a huge value chain around these imports. So the impact is both in Colombia and the U.S. This is a very paradoxical situation because everyone agrees that this legislation should be extended. We have a very particular situation in which this legislation is hostage somehow, hostage of other issues. And we expect that those issues are resolved soon and we can move forward. But clearly, there is a commitment for both parties and the administration also to move this ahead. Ambassador Ron Kirk has said so in every occasion in Congress, and we have heard the same thing from many, many friends in Congress. So we expect that this current stalemate is overcome and we can move forward.
Well, Ambassador, on behalf of NDN, the Latin American Policy Institute, our viewers out there on the web, and those here in the room, thank you.